All right, just for the sake of the recording, quick introduction. This is for the Los Alamos Go Club, and we have a lot of new players, so we're doing some sort of introductory lectures. And last week we talked about the importance of corners, and then sides, and then centers as the way that you sort of prioritize your play and theme your play, usually. So now I thought we could talk a little bit about end game, because this is something that comes up, I've seen a lot in y'all's games where not necessarily sure what to play or see a lot of mistakes in that area. And I think it also helps just a lot for understanding how groups are built. So on the board, I have a super simplified 13 by 13 game, right? So black took the left side, white took the right side. The score is similar. I didn't count it, but we're just going to pretend like it's really close. And so what I want to focus on specifically, and y'all on stream, can you see, like, if I move my mouse, can you see the little, like, ghost stone that moves around?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, cool. I think that should be on recording as well. So, anyway, what you'll notice is, so I made this little partition here specifically so that we could talk about these two groups. So this is, if the game were to just continue on in this way, these two groups are the same size. They're both 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 1, 2, 3. So this is 15 points. This is 15 points. And so what we can use this for is to kind of look at some different endgame scenarios and talk about how big of an influence they had on the score. So I'm going to go back a little bit, and I'm going to introduce some terms as well. Now, I want to be clear. There are 3 terms I'm going to introduce here, and they're probably in the title of the video. Which are going to be open windows, a crack in the door, and a hat. And I have never seen any of those terms in actual like Go lectures or on Sensei's library or anything. So if there are actual terms for these things, please let me know. But I just find these as like helpful terms. So I'm just going to use them. And if you know the correct terms or if you know better terms, please leave them in the comments for the 10 of you who are going to watch this. So the first thing is that, let me show this, and I think we talked about it a little bit last time, is one way you can kind of imagine the boundaries of the territory that you're building is just to take the stones that comprise it, go to the edges, and draw a line from that stone to the nearest edge of the board. So we can imagine this is sort of the ghost boundary of our territories, right? Just like I drew before. But we can push those out a little bit. And if you have the opportunity to grow one of your territories and shrink your opponent's territory at the same time, then that's going to result in more points for you and less points for them, right? So that's what you want to do. And that's true throughout the whole game, but specifically in endgame. We're not going to talk much about like specifically counting endgame. You know, there's like Sentei and reverse Sentei and a lot of things that we can talk about there. I just want to talk sort of thematically on what we should do here. So, like we said, in the most simple case, black could descend, and this is what I want to call an open window. Okay, so on the second line, and remember we always count from, gravity goes outward on a Go board. So from the second line, if you have a stone that looks into the house or the territory that the other player is trying to make, I would call that an open window. So black descends and sort of opens the window looking into white's territory. So white closes the window. And then let's say black goes down, and this is what I'm going to call a crack under the door. Again, sort of going with the analogy that your territory is a house. So there's like a crack under the door. And black is threatening to sort of crawl in there, and then white can close that down. So this is the most boring, mundane endgame. Black could have gotten better. So let's go back a little bit. So this is probably the most common endgame that you'll see, where let's say black, instead of going straight down, will crawl a little bit under the door. So now white needs to be careful. So the typical sequence here would be white block, then black has to fix because the stone is in Atari, and then white needs to decide, do I need to fix this cut or not? So in this case, we can imagine if black cuts, white can run, black can Atari, white runs, etc., etc., etc. And then eventually white will get to hook up to this group and would be fine. So in other words, the cut is not dangerous. And we can play it out. So let's say white ignores. This is not a good move. You wouldn't want to play that. I'm just wasting a move. So let's say cut, run, Atari, run, Atari, run, Atari, run. And that's fine. Now these black stones are not going to be able to find life inside of here. They're just going to die. And so this is fine. So this is the kind of thing that you want to read when you decide, should I fix the cut? So let's go the other way. Again, I'm going to just waste a move as black real quick. So let's say it's white's turn. And we want to play some endgame. So white plays here. Black blocks. White fixes. So now ask yourself the question, does black need to fix this cut? It's different because over here white had a border, some stones to run to. Over here black does not. And so the answer is, of course, that black does need to fix there. So if black didn't, let's say black had somewhere else to play on the board. Cut, Atari, Atari, run. Oop, I think I misspoke there. Atari, run, Atari, run, dead. Now, these 15 points that were black's are 0 points. And in fact, white is going to get a couple points in here too. So, yeah, that was very bad. And so to avoid that, in this case, black does need to fix. There are a few ways you can fix. You could fix here. That's the easiest way. You could also fix here. The risk with this kind of fix is that it leaves a co-threat for later, but we haven't talked about co's yet, so don't worry about that. And you can also even consider fixing, let's say, here. Right? Because now if white cuts, run, run, it's fine. No big deal. It might not be fine. No, it's fine. See, we always have to be careful with stuff like that. Okay, it's fine. So if white tries to do some antics like this, black can Atari, and I don't know, there's nothing. If white tries to run, you just die. Okay. And so a fix like this might be useful if, let's say, you had an open door on this side too. And so you could fix both of them at the same time with a move like this. It's pretty useful. Cool. So let's look at the value of those then. So just a little bit, loose counting, not exact. So we said before both of these territories were worth 15 points. So if we do this endgame, and then white does not need to respond, we can see that white has lost 1 point, right? So this is 5 by 3 is 15 minus 1. So this is worth 14 points now, because there's sort of a brick inside of the house of white now. And black's territory is worth the same amount. Black did not gain any points, just filled in some of white's. And it's worth noting that this is gote, right? So black started the endgame move by playing g1, but then had to play a move at the end of the sequence and gave white the freedom to play somewhere else on the board. So that's called a gote sequence. By contrast, if we do it on white's side, so go under, block, fix, fix, and again, it doesn't matter where you fix, it'll be the same value. What's the score difference? So here, white's value stayed the same, 15, but black lost 2 points because black had to fix that cut. So now this is only worth 13, and it was sente for white. Basically, it was free. White got to play f1 first, and then by the end of the sequence, white gets to do something else. And so if you can do that, in sente, that's always the best endgame. Anything basically that is sente and endgame is going to be your best option, because then you get to go and do something else. So cool. So this would have been a great move for white. This would have been an okay move for black. It depends on what the rest of the board looks like. So for y'all in chat, we don't have any like beginner players in chat right now, but we have some more experienced players. Is there anything that y'all would add to the crack under the door sequence there? Anything that you think I missed?
I guess one point would be that one advantage for if black just wanted to descend down to f1 immediately, then that could still be sente.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so let's look at that. So I said that this was the most boring way, and in the exact board that we're looking at, the game is basically settled, and so black might be willing to waste a turn just to take 1 point from white with this. But if black wanted to keep sente, something like this might be possible, because if white ignores, then black gets to do this, and again, white doesn't need to fix the cut. This isn't actually dangerous, but it is a threat. So basically, black gets to keep the same amount of territory just like he would have before, and he just gets to threaten white. Actually, I think that the G1 descent is maybe Sente for white. Maybe not for black. I don't know. I'm trying to think, actually, is there any advantage to this? Um, so now white has the option to just keep their territory. Yeah, I guess so. So you could give white the option to keep that 1 point and give black Sente. Um, this way, it's basically forced. So yeah, it's an option, and it's something to consider. And it's going to be very similar once we go up one more line.
And so I just kind of wanted to add, my stream is frozen, so I can't really see what's happening on the board.
Oh, right.
But at one point, I heard you talk about how the 15 points for black became nothing for black because they didn't answer.
Yeah.
Or they didn't fix the cut. And I remember a lot when you and I were learning to play. You would just go ahead and take those moves because I would respond to them, and they were always Sente for you. But a thing to keep in mind is that the only reason that's Sente there, the only reason that black loses that territory is because of how resolved the board state is that Tom has made. That's why this is called endgame.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of times the more experienced players will just leave it to go play something bigger, because even if the other player does take that advantage to make the cut or to make an invasion, then there's something else to gain from it. So it's very easy to kind of get lulled into the trap of, oh, well, I have this cut if they don't respond, but that doesn't mean that it is big.
Right. Yeah, and that is always the case, right, with Sente and Gote, which is that so the theoretical Sente is always the biggest move on the board, right? So when we play, let's say black plays here, so black is threatening to eat some of white's territory, but maybe there's a bigger move for white somewhere else on the board, and so actually let me go the other way. So white here is threatening to take away these 15 points, right? If black doesn't respond appropriately. But if black can find another move that threatens to take away 30 points, then that's a bigger move, right? And so you might want to go play that. It just depends. But yeah, that's a good point, is that endgame moves are not always Sente. You have to look at the state of the board. Okay, so let's go one more line up, and there are a lot more variations here. We're not going to go over necessarily everything, but I think it's valuable. So here we mentioned that black is, so now there's an open window in white's territory. And if white ignores, there are a lot of things black can do to take away this territory. The simplest thing, which you probably wouldn't do, is just crawl. If you crawl, let's say white fixes here, then let's say black goes under, maybe white crawls again, maybe black goes under again, fix. We got to eat away some territory. That's kind of the boring way. One thing black can do is jump, right? So if white tries to disconnect, black can connect underneath. So eventually this connection will be made, and that can be this can be pretty burdensome for white. And then one more thing that's very common is called the monkey jump, and maybe we'll do a whole lecture on this someday. But basically, black can play a move like this. This is like a long knight's jump, 1 down and 3 over. There's no way for white to disconnect, and if you haven't seen this before, I would encourage you to set this up on a little demo board and try to disconnect as white. So if you try this, black can just eat it. If you try, for example, this, black can go under. White can't disconnect there because it would destroy. So like that. So this can be a really annoying way to eat away points. So usually white would be motivated to shut the window there. But another thing black could do, instead of just directly descending and threatening to take away points, is black could just directly start taking away points with a hane. So now if white blocks, and let's do the simple variation, if we just go down and down. Now ask yourself, as black, do I owe a move? So whenever you're asking that, you need to ask about the cut. So let's say black ignores, white cuts. This is dangerous. It is, right? So black did owe a move there. So where the direct descent was Sente, the hane is Gote. So if white responds, let's say black descends, white descends, black needs to fix. And again, you can fix in a couple places. You could fix there. You could fix there. I guess technically you could fix here too, but we never see that. That's kind of weird. There's like an Atari here, and maybe white can use that later. Apologies if you hear my dog complaining in the background. So yeah, let's say we fix here. So let's look at this is kind of a simple Hane and response kind of end game. And so let's count the points, right? It's 3 times 5 minus 2. So 15 minus 2 is 13 points for white. And black this time actually gained 1 more point. So 16 points for black. So that's a 3-point swing in the end game there, in the final score. So that's pretty nice. 1 second. Yeah, so just something to consider. And so we talked about the open window, we talked about the crack under the door, and so now I want to talk about the hat. Let's look specifically at this scenario. So there's a stone on the second line, which if black did not respond, white can Atari, facing the edge. I call this a hat, and I don't know why. To me, this is like this stone now has a hat on it. And it's just important to note that this is now a dead stone. There's no way for it to escape. If it tries to run, white can Atari and eventually kill. And so it's important to look on the second line for this exact Atari. And in the same way that you see the Atari here, you can look a move before and see the threat of that Atari. Right? This is why black needs to continue here. Now, black could directly fix, but in this case also black has the ability to descend. But then it's the same reason that black needs to fix here, right? So basically, if black does not, this is the same thing as the hat, right? So if you had tried to hat and run, and then black ran with you, there's no escape. So we'll see this a lot, this second line Atari. And so you just need to keep your eye out for it. And I'll try to point it out in your games. So when I write reviews, I'll say, well, this is a hat. You should probably fix it. And you don't necessarily always have to fix it. Because one of the nice things about it, let's say black ignored and white took it. It's gote for white to take. So in other words, black can force white to take it. Let's say like this. And now maybe black could go do something else on the board. So sometimes you'll see players leave this alone. It's kind of the next, what do you call it? The next level of thinking where you're like, I see that this is a hat, but I'm not going to fix it because I have something else I want to do on the board. But most typically, we would fix it. One other thing about this that I want to point out, I did this a lot in my games when I was first learning the game. So I'd Hane, then my opponent would do that, and then I would Hane again, and my opponent would do that, and then we would just call it finished. Like this is how the game would end. The game is not over, right? For a couple reasons. One, you might notice this stone is an Atari, so really black should fix it. But if black fixes it, white has this, right? And there's no way for black to escape. And so really, it was too greedy even just to do this move. At this point, white can do the hat. If black runs, white can Atari, and there's no way for black to escape. So you have to be very careful about this sort of double Hane on the first line. That feels like the right end game, but it's not. And so, in principle, the way we avoid that is just by always asking, what if my opponent cuts? Right? So anytime you leave a cut, try to ask, and sometimes it can require deep reading, but in this case, not too bad. Just try to ask, what if my opponent cuts? Is it dangerous? And so in this case, if you had asked, if I play h1 and my opponent cuts, is it dangerous? I think this is probably a sequence you could learn to read out and say, yes, that is dangerous. Yeah, so we want to be careful there. Another thing that's pretty common here is actually something like this. And white will usually respond. Well, anyway, we don't need to talk about this. It's kind of an advanced thing. You can threaten a co-fight, and the co is more valuable for black, but or more threatening for white, I guess I should say. But anyway, so just as we're talking about finishing our territory, these are the kind of things we want to think about. Try to grow your own territory and try to shrink your opponent's territory. And remember that territories need to go all the way to the edge, right? Because kind of in the end of the game, the way you decide whether someone owns the territory or not is like you can treat these like a road, plop a car on the lines, and if you can only if the only live stones that you can find are of one color, then that color owns the territory. And by live I mean will eventually live, right? So let's say there's a black white stone there and two black stones here. This is going to be a dead stone. So if I plop a car and drive around on here, I will find this white stone, but it's going to die in the end. So that's I would say a dead white stone.
Hey,
yeah.
Tom.
Yeah.
I just want to interject real quick, because I feel like the concept for trying to read ahead to these moves is kind of stressful for a lot of new players.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that looking at this kind of end game near the walls is a really good chance for new players to practice reading.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you get to that situation and you play a move on the wall or near the wall at the window, and you say, is it what happens if my opponent cuts? Just stop and don't just think, okay, well, if they cut, that puts my stone in Atari. Think, well, if I respond to that Atari, can they follow up and keep me in Atari? Do I gain anything from it? And since it's such limited space, I think that's kind of a good introduction to that kind of reading aspect.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. Tom, did you have anything to add as well?
Nope.
Cool. Okay, well, I think that's about it for now. And so I think next time we'll play some like example games. Maybe I'll just pull up a bot and try to play simply, and then we can talk about the last two lectures. We can do corners, sides, and center. Play kind of simply in that way, and then once we start playing some end game moves, we can point out in a much less simplified game, in an actual real game, what these end game moves start to look like, when they should be played, things like that. And it's worth noting that we call them end game, but it's not necessarily always at the end of the game. Sometimes it becomes an important enough move that you respond even in the mid game, even in the early game. It's possible if it threatens to, let's say, kill a group. And maybe we should do some life and death before that. Nah, it's fine. We can just do that. Okay. Well, anyway, so that's our mini lecture for the day. Sorry we didn't have any beginners on with us today. I hope that y'all get to at least watch this video and maybe ask us some comments. And actually, this week has been really productive. We've done several belt tests, which is, if you're not familiar, in the Los Alamos Go Club, sort of some benchmark skill tests. A lot of people did white belt. A couple people did green. So yeah, it's been good. And okay, well, we'll catch y'all later, and we'll just continue our weekly meeting now.